We're moving to our closing keynote for WHD Global 2017 here at Europa Park in Rust, Germany. And it's a sad moment because soon we're going to be saying goodbye. But before we do, we have a very important piece. And I want you to be able to get the most out of this because this is an inspirational and aspirational story, true life story, of overcoming our personal challenges, fears, and uncertainty to conquer new lands and to seed in a fabulous project that was literally a risk of death if we weren't successful in achieving this. We're going to hear about that. But before that, I want you to make sure you can connect the dots. I want you to see this inspiration is designed to help you get new ideas on how you can get closer to reaching your aspirational goals of whatever they are for your cloud business. So, to help introduce our next speaker, whose name is Laura Dekker, the youngest person to have circumnavigated the world solo and by herself, just avoid any confusion there, she is going to tell us her story. But before that, just to give you a sense of what she went through, just take a quick look at this video.
With WHD Global's presentations nearing a close, we have an incredibly inspiring speaker who overcame huge obstacles to become the youngest person to sail around the world alone. From her family to court judges, nothing could keep her from achieving her global ambitions. In this amazing presentation, you'll hear about an incredible journey that will inspire you to take on the world.
She was 14 when she left, and she was 16 when she arrived. Please help me welcome to the WHD Global stage, Laura Dekker.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Laura. I'm now 21 years old, but when I was 14, I decided to go and sail around the world on my own. So I finished that journey when I was 16, and well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about that trip today. I'm just going to start with a short video so you get a little bit of an impression of what it looked like. So if we could do that. En nu zeil ik. Kijk, we zitten nu 4 centimeter vanaf en het voelt hem helemaal niks. Ik kan het niet zien, maar het is echt heel raar om weer zo dicht bij land te zijn. sluit ik naar de SSB en praat nog met andere zeilers. Gooi alle vliegende vissen weer van dek af, met kleine inktvisjes. And now, I'm gonna offer my pancake to Neptune. The moment is here. Oh, it landed on the deck. Guppy, Guppy. So, thank you. So one of the questions I get asked most frequently is, why would you want to go sail around the world when you're 14? And since that's a pretty good question, I'm just going to start with answering that one. But to answer it properly, I have to back up a little bit. So my dad built this boat when he was in his early 20s. While he was building, he met my mother. They got married, and they started off from Holland, leaving on a trip around the world. So a couple of years later, they were in New Zealand, and that's where I come into the picture. I was born in New Zealand during the circumnavigation of my parents. So after 2 years there, we continued on sailing, and I was part of the crew. Don't think I was particularly helpful, but learned how to handle the ropes. So, of course, along the way, my parents had to work. My dad being very handy and liking building things and boats, he mostly found jobs in shipyards and fixing boats in the marina. Mom, on the other hand, is very creative, and actually she's been a street performer her whole life. So she's done everything from working with snakes to clown shows. So that's how we kept on sailing. Also, we traveled a lot. Went to Indonesia and then slowly back to Holland. 3 years later, my younger sister Kim was born. She tends to be a little bit more like my mom, and she doesn't like sailing very much, but she's actually traveling around in the circus at the moment. So this is my sister. So I have a pretty strange family to start with. So I was 5 when we arrived back in Holland, and when I was 6, my parents divorced. My dad had started building another boat, a bigger boat, and I decided to stay with my dad, and my sister grew up with my mom. So I grew up on the shipyard with my dad, and yeah, this is the boat, and this is what it looks like now. He's almost finished. Just the mast. It's going to be a sailboat again. So you can imagine that growing up like this, I got quite inspired to build my own little boat, which looked like this. This is kind of where it all began. I just loved the water, being on the water, and my dad recognized this pretty quickly, helped me make it a bit more like a sailboat. Later he gave me an optimist, and then a couple of years later even, I got a mirror from a friend of my dad, and started doing a lot of races on the rivers in Holland. And I was doing pretty well. It was actually a 2-man boat, and I always sailed alone. But eventually in the youth division, they just said, you know, it's not really fair to the other kids if you're always first. So really you should take another person just to make the boat heavier. And I didn't really want to sail with another person. So I asked them if instead of another person, I could take my dog along. And they agreed. So actually, most of the races I sailed together with my dog, and we still won most of them. So then I was kicked out of the youth division entirely. And then the next choice was to go with the adult division, which was mostly keel boats. And I managed to borrow this boat from a friend of my dad's. It was totally neglected, and I just fixed it up and cleaned it all and put it in a marina. However, racing this boat on my own was quite difficult. I did have the dog, but he wasn't very much of a help. So that's kind of how I started to get into cruising, just sailing around the lakes and on the rivers in Holland. When I was 10 years old, I took this boat, and in my summer holidays, I sailed around Holland on my own, well, together with the dog. The dog was always there, wherever I went, even though he didn't like sailing very much. But he's a good friend, so he did it for me. So when I was 11, I bought my own boat. And at this stage, people are generally wondering how an 11-year-old kid buys a boat, which is a good question. So I've had this crazy dream that at some stage in my life, I wanted to sail around the world. I had absolutely no idea how or when or any details. I just knew I wanted to do it at some stage. And so I figured I was going to need a boat, I was going to need money, I was going to need to learn a lot. And I figured I just better start straight away. So as an 8-year-old, I found jobs just cleaning up shops, delivering newspapers. With my first earned money, I bought a unicycle, which was a really good investment. I learned to do some tricks on it and then drove around in the villages and earned pretty good money with that, actually, at the time. So that's how I bought my boat at 11 and sailed around Holland again with that. Then by the time I was 13, I was starting to get a little bit bored of Holland. I'd seen the rivers and been up to the islands, and I wanted to go somewhere else. So for me, the next logical step was England, which is about 24-hour sail with my little boat. And I figured it would be the best idea not to tell anybody about it. So I didn't. Got the boat ready in a school holiday and just set off. And this boat didn't have much on it, no radar. I just had a handheld GPS and a paper map, and that's it. And the weather was like this, so it was really nasty. And I don't know if any of you know the North Sea, but it's kind of comparable to trying to cross a highway. There's so many ships, it's really quite hard. Anyhow, I managed to get safely to the other side. That wasn't really the problem. On the other side, however, the police was waiting, but that's a whole other story. Eventually, my dad had to come over and drag me there. And, anyhow, he said, if you sailed here, you might as well sail back to Holland. So I did. And that's really when I realized, why don't I go now? I have a boat that is seaworthy. I know how to navigate. I know how to get to other places. I will work along the way. And I didn't really see a problem. Why not to go? Of course, I was pretty much the only one in that. Were a lot of people who saw a lot of problems. And pretty quickly, it became a court case. The childcare got to know about it. And the court ordered that my boat, my 7-meter boat, was too small. And we needed to get a bigger boat. So I sold my little one and got this boat. Together with my dad, fixed it up completely. So pretty much everything I knew about sailing at that time anyway, I had learned from my dad, whether it's maintaining or engines or navigating. I'd learned it all from Dad. So this is Guppy. She's my boat that I sailed around in. She's 38 foot, and even though I really kind of miss my small boat, I'm glad I have this one. Not because it's more seaworthy or more comfortable or anything like that, but simply because I could keep living on it afterwards, and that was quite nice. So on my first test trip to England, I was in the middle of one of these shipping lanes, and I went straight through a huge fishing net that was just floating around there. And it was a bit of a problem, because there was absolutely no wind, so I was running the engine, and the engine just stopped straight away. And it was pretty obvious what the problem was, but I've got 2 engines. So I thought, okay, I'm going to start the second engine in full power forward and hope that it's not going to get stuck. Of course it did. So I had no engines and no wind to sail, and I was in the middle of one of these shipping lanes. And I just needed to make a decision straight away. So I just jumped over the side with a knife and started cutting away the net like crazy. And just managed to free my little propeller, which is just a 10 horsepower engine. So it took me quite a while to get back to Holland, but it was actually a very good test of what to do in a very tricky situation. So in August 2010, the court finally decided that the responsibility would go back to my parents, and I was allowed to sail. We went through like 8 court cases or something over a year. It was pretty dramatic. But now I'm talking about the trip. So I was finally able to leave, and the first passage was actually one of the scariest. Everything was absolutely fine, but I was just so nervous and happy, and like absolutely every emotion that you could have, I had at the same time. It's incredibly confusing. But once I saw the first islands, it was really a good feel of victory, and like it gave me a lot of confidence that I could keep going. So from Europe, I left off and sailed down to the Canary Islands, Cape Verde, and then across the Atlantic to the Caribbean, which is where most of the challenges actually were. With this bigger boat that I had, that I needed to get to know, that was challenging, but also the weather was a bit more challenging. I got to know squalls, which are just sudden weather storms. They can suddenly have a lot of wind or a lot of rain, and often you don't see them coming, they just come. So that's when stuff like this happens. Here I went flying through the entire boat with my food. It was not a good moment. I was very angry at the weather. But it only happened once or twice, and I got to know how to do it. So on this boat, I did have a radar, and I learned how to see the squalls on the radar and what to do about them. So that was good. Of course, stuff also broke. Here, my wind vane rudder broke, which, being a solo sailor, is actually pretty important. I can't be out there all the time and steering. I need to eat and sleep and navigate and do other things. So luckily, I did have some spare parts on the boat, and I was able to fix it at sea. So actually, one of the main reasons I wanted to sail around the world was I wanted to see other countries and meet other people. I was really interested in just seeing what the rest of the world was like. So I spent a lot of time on land and visiting different islands and getting to know the locals, which it was a very amazing experience for me, just knowing the Western culture, seeing people live in these tiny little huts. And actually, the first time I saw this hut, I thought, man, these people, how can they live here in the middle of nowhere in this tiny hut? And then I saw the people, and they actually invited me over and gave me some of the fruits, and I tried to communicate with them a little bit, and it was very interesting. Most of the times when I met people like this that really lived far away from civilization and had, in our eyes, absolutely nothing, they were so happy and so content and so friendly and open. And I remember a couple of times, actually, I asked people, well, wouldn't you want to have more? Wouldn't you want to, have a bigger house or just some more stuff? And most of the time the answer was no. What for? Why do we need anything else? We've got everything we need. And some of them were even confused that I would even dare to ask that question. And they said, we've got a roof above our heads, and we've got fruits of the lands, and we've got water from the little stream, and that was really a moment that I realized, right, materialistic things don't make us happy. These people were happy with what they had and being with their families. So that was a really nice thing for me to just see that and learn that. So from the Caribbean, I went through the Panama Canal and into the Pacific Ocean, which is actually where I really wanted to go. And it was quite an amazing ocean, yeah. Besides the cool sunsets, I also saw much more sea life than I had seen in the Caribbean and the Atlantic. So along the way, I saw some dolphins and heaps of flying fish. This is actually not a live flying fish. I spent hours and hours trying to catch a picture of a flying fish. It's incredibly difficult. They're really fast. You don't know when they come, of course. But since I had lots of time anyway, I thought I'd try. Eventually, I just didn't manage, and I had to give up. So luckily, in the morning, there were just all these flying fish on the deck. So I just chose one, a pretty one, and threw it back into the water. I made a picture, and it just worked out so incredibly well. It even looks like I'm pointing at it. So. So I also saw some sharks. I actually just put this in the presentation because I get so many questions about sharks. But really, if you don't go for a swim or decide to sink the boat right that moment, it's not that big of a problem. I've they just always swam past, and maybe I saw 3 over the whole 2 years, so really not that many, and I've never worried about them at all. So from Panama Canal, I went across to the Galapagos Islands and then to the Marquesas Islands, and this was a good trip, good winds. However, along the way, a wave kind of came from a different direction than all the other waves. And I was thrown from the companionway inside the boat. And somewhere along the flight, my foot hit something. I'm still not quite sure what. And I had a big hole in my foot, about a centimeter deep and a centimeter wide. And I couldn't walk on that foot anymore, which on the boat actually wasn't that big of a problem. I could kind of make my way like a flamingo everywhere. The only big problem was that on the boat it was always salty, it was always wet, and it just simply didn't heal. So by the time I finally got to the islands, it was actually a bigger wound than it had been in the beginning. And out at sea, there's no bacteria, no viruses, so it's pretty clean. I wasn't very worried. However, on tropical islands, having a big open wound is quite scary, and I just knew I needed to keep it very clean, but that's about it. So I was a bit worried about it, and one day I was just kind of limping up this hill to get to the little village to buy myself some food, and then this guy with his family stopped by, and they didn't speak any English or any language that I speak, so we were kind of hand-feet communicating, and they were pointing at my foot saying, what's wrong, and eventually they said, okay, come on, we're taking you. And they took me up to their house, and the woman straight away put down some herbs and things and put it on my foot, and they bandaged it all up. And then they brought me back to my boat. And I thought it was so amazing. But actually the amazing thing was that the next day they came back, and they said, come on, we have to take care of your foot. And they did this for a couple of days until it really started to get better. And I'm very thankful that these people did that, because, well, I could have maybe lost my foot. And I found often on the islands, if somebody needed help or anybody in their community that was there, they would help that person. And these people I always tried every day, I tried to give them something back because I was very thankful for what they were doing. But they always kind of even seemed offended or something, like they didn't want to have something back. And I realized that for them, the giving was so nice because they were really giving. They didn't expect anything back. And then I was thinking about that and realized that giving a present isn't as much fun as if you get something back. So that was a nice thing in that community, that they were just always helping each other out. And in this case, me, which was very good. So I really love the Pacific Islands. They were very beautiful islands and very nice people. Sadly, I had to rush through them quite quickly because I was late in the hurricane season and I needed to get out of there before the hurricanes would come up. So since I love the island so much, I would spend most of my time actually exploring the islands and meeting the people. And every time something broke on the boat, I thought, oh, it's just something small. I will fix it later, whatever. It's not going to be important. Well, in the end, on my way to Australia from Vanuatu, a lot of stuff broke. Really a lot. Just because I had failed to do all the little maintenance in between that I thought wasn't important. And then one day, even my steering wheel just completely fell off, which is, you kind of need a steering wheel. So that was bad. Also, all of my sails ripped. And if it's a small rip like this one, of course, it's not so bad. I would stitch it. But some of them actually just went straight through. So it took me quite a while to get to Australia, and then I had a lot of fixing to do. So another big lesson learned was to fix all the little things when they break. Luckily, my dad was so nice to come to Australia and help me a little bit with fixing, so that was great. So actually, another big decision I made before the trip even was to not have any big financial sponsors. I had sponsors for the sails and the solar panel and dinghy, all that sort of stuff, but no financial sponsors. Mostly because it was my dream and my trip, and I just wanted to do it my way. And I was just afraid that if I had a big sponsor, they would turn my dream into their business, which is absolutely in their right. but I didn't want that to happen. So, and I'm really, really happy with that decision because I think I learned a lot through it. I had to be very creative with what to do, which is how this picture relates. In Darwin, I had to take the boat out of the water, which is quite expensive if you do it at a yard. However, there was a 7-meter tide difference between low and high water. And there were these 2 poles on the beach. So I figured if I would go up on high water and tie the boat up to the poles and wait until the water drops, I would have access to the bottom of the boat. And that worked out quite well. So I had to do it a couple of times, sadly, because I had a lot of work. But it saved me a lot of money. So that was good. So it also had a lot of consequences, of course. The electronics and things I had on the boat were very basic. The most advanced thing I had was the SSB radio, which allowed me to talk to other sailors that were out there, and also to send short messages home, which my parents were very happy about. But in a way, I feel like I learned much more what the value is of things on the boat. You know, if I worked really hard for a new sail, I would make very, very sure it wouldn't rip, because I worked for it very hard. And in a way, I feel like if I would have had sponsors, I might have not appreciated so much. So I'm very happy now that I did it that way. And I just really, literally had to learn everything on the boat, dealing with engines and dealing with things that break. And then, of course, the everyday things like doing the laundry and cooking, which sometimes was a bit of a disaster, but I figured it out in the end. So from Australia, I sailed straight to South Africa. This is a 6,000-mile trip. It took me 48 days. And there's islands on the way that I could have stopped at, but I just decided not to. Mostly because I just wanted to. I wanted to see what it was like to be out there for so long. Another reason was I was very late in the season. I needed to get to South Africa before the Indian Ocean would get very badly plagued with storms. So there I went, and the first days were really horrible. I had just absolutely no wind. And I have a lot of people who are really worried about storms that ask me questions all the time. But actually, what I hate most is the calms. They're just horrible. If it's nice and flat like this, it's not that bad. But sometimes there's just this enormous swell that is rolling through, and you're just going from one side to the other side, and you can't do anything on the boat. And things even break more, because you're just flapping around all the time. Your sails chafe, and everything that even has a slight movement, it will just break. And it was just so annoying to be going absolutely nowhere, and yet everything is breaking. So I was really quite happy when the weather started to change and the first storm came through. It was good. We were finally going somewhere. Things were happening. I think we were going completely the wrong way, but I was still pretty happy. So in the beginning, I was actually nervous about storms in the beginning, but by that time I knew the boat so well, and I knew what to do in a storm. I wasn't scared of it. Also, I think on the Indian Ocean, I really started to work together with nature much more than I had done before. Before, I was really focused on getting to the land. I wanted to see it. But here, I had started to love the sailing more and more, and the nature around it. I would just spend hours looking at the clouds and at the ocean. I also figured out that I shouldn't fight it. You know, I shouldn't fight the wind, and I shouldn't fight the waves, because they're a lot stronger than I am. I'm out there with this tiny little dot of a boat, really. And one big wave could just roll it over and smash it all up. So I decided not to mess with it. Just kind of go like, okay, you want to blow me that way, that's fine, we'll just go that way. And that made it so much easier for me. So that was good. So actually the boat is not really set up for long distance sailing. I have no water maker. And just solar panels for power. Could run the engine, but never had to. So I really relied on rain. But luckily there were a lot of storms and a lot of rain, so that worked out well. So actually I wasn't completely alone on that trip either. I had a little friend with me. It was not really a friend actually, we didn't become very good friends. It was a pretty grumpy bird. It just one day landed on the boat and then sat there. I tried to feed it and give it water, and it just sat there looking really grumpily. like it does here. Tried to speak to it in Dutch and German and English, didn't answer. So it just sat there for a week and then left again. Gave me not a very nice goodbye present, actually. It was pretty horrible. It took me like 3 days to figure out why my batteries were so empty. Just couldn't figure it out. I checked the regulators and the cabling and everything, because solar panels don't generally break. So I couldn't figure it out, and eventually thought, well, it must be the panels. Well, it was pretty obvious what had happened, but yeah, birds and I didn't become very good friends. So even though the Indian Ocean was very challenging weather-wise, I had no wind and then a storm and then no wind again. Somehow mentally, it was really one of the best trips. Because after 2 weeks, the time, it just disappeared. Like, I just didn't care about it anymore. I didn't care what day it is or what month or even what year. It just didn't matter. All that mattered was getting the boat to the next place. Just me, the boat, the winds, weather, and that's it. There was just nothing else. So I wouldn't say it was easy, but in a way, life was very simple. I knew how to handle the situations, and I was happy. So weather-wise, it was tough, but mentally, it was a very good trip. It became even tougher, though, with the weather when I got to South Africa, which is where I got pretty much the worst storm. We left from Port Elizabeth to go to Cape Town, which is just 3 days of sailing or something, with a couple of boats, about 7 boats. And the weather forecast said, okay, in 2 days you will get maybe 30 knots of wind. And I thought, oh, 30 knots of wind, that's nothing, you know. Then the following day it said, well, it might get up to 40 or 45 knots. And then I still thought, okay, that's quite a lot, but to now go all the way back again, yeah, I didn't really want to do that. Most of the group of boats did turn back. Just me and one other boat kept going to Cape Town. And it actually turned out to be 60 knots of wind, which is really a lot of wind. And this picture was taken just a day or two before that came through. And in a way, even though I know from weather forecasts and what people have told me that it was definitely the worst weather that I was in, but I don't quite remember it that way. The wind vane couldn't steer my boat anymore, and neither the autopilot. So I had to hand steer the boat to Cape Town, which was still about 1.5 days away. So the first hours were really hard. I was standing there, and I was just being blasted with cold water, and I was tired and hungry. But then after a few hours, it just left, and all I was thinking was just, okay, next wave, I just need to get there, And there was just absolutely nothing. I didn't even hear the wind or the waves. It was a really absolutely absurd experience. I think what happened is that my body just went over into survival mode, and it just narrowed down that energy to, okay, just focus on the one task you have and not about worrying. But it's absurd because I don't even really remember what it was like, even though I've heard from other people and the other boats I was there that there were high waves and that it was difficult, but I don't even really remember it that way. So to me, it wasn't that exciting. Anyhow, so I got to Cape Town safely, and my dad awaited me there at the dock and just dragged me off the boat and put me into a warm restaurant. And after about half an hour, maybe an hour even, I started to realize that I had actually made it to Cape Town. That I was like, oh, I'm here, the boat is here, we've made it. And suddenly I was so tired and so hungry and so cold as well. It was a really crazy experience, but so amazing to realize what a human body is capable of. Because, well, really, if somebody would blast me with cold water now and say you just have to stand there for a day, there's just absolutely no way I could do it. But somehow I managed, and that was good. So from South Africa, I went straight back to the Caribbean, because I kind of liked the long-distance sailing. So another 6,000-mile trip, and as you can see here, the Caribbean is where the two lines cross. So that's where I officially managed to sail around the world. So at night, because I'm alone, of course I need to sleep sometimes. So actually what I did is just sleep for an hour and then wake up and check if everything is still fine. And then I would just go back to sleep if everything was fine for another hour. And that worked out quite well. I would just get these hour naps whenever I could, whether it was during the night or during the day. The first week was always very hard, but then after that I got very used to it. So the weather there was actually quite nice. I had the wind from behind all the time, and lots of wind, so I was going very fast. Just going across the equator was a bit rougher, which it always is. In the equator you get these kind of crazy weather systems because the north and the south come together. And I didn't experience that as much on the time I crossed the equator before, but here it was lots of sudden squalls and then no wind and then lots of wind and then waves and no waves. But it was just for a day or two. And once I was through that, I was all smooth sailing back up to the Caribbean. So sailing-wise, that trip was good. Somehow mentally, though, it was a lot harder because it was the last trip. It was, I was gonna have, once I arrived, that was it. I would have managed to do what I set out to do. And in a way, that was kind of absurd and scary, and I didn't want it to end. And it also didn't really feel like an end to me. Because I had originally set out to see the world, to know what it was like to be out there. And I think in South Africa, I already kind of got everything I wanted. I'd seen lots of islands and met lots of people. I'd been through storms and calms, been out there for a long time. So I had what I wanted. And coming back to St. Martin, for me, didn't quite feel like something really special. I also absolutely didn't realize that what I had done was maybe something crazy or special, or whatever you want to call it. To me, it was simply another stopover. And actually, I remember my dad writing me a short message saying, "Oh, everybody is so excited, and there will be lots of media and people waiting for you, and it will be great." And the only thing I thought of was, what? No, I don't want that. And I wrote him a message back saying, "Well, I'm going to go to another island, and once I'm there, I will tell you where I am." And of course, that kind of freaked my family out a bit. So they finally convinced me that I should go to St. Martin. But really, all you want after 41 days at sea is to just have a warm shower and something good to eat and sleep a night through, not to look into lots of people's faces. But I survived everything fine. And stayed for a couple of days in St. Martin before I kept sailing to New Zealand. I decided I didn't really want to go back to Holland, and I really wanted to see where I was born. So, I would sail there. Another half time around the world, but oh well. On the way, I had a little kitten with me on the last bit. Also an unwanted passenger who just sneaked onto the boat. It was kind of creepy. I was actually anchored in the Galapagos Islands here and came out at night just to check. And then there's this huge black blob that was just lying there. And for a moment I thought, oh, maybe it's something I left outside. So I touched it and it just growled at me. I was really upset that I disturbed it. So I thought, okay, never mind, you can sleep here. It's not a problem. So he did. He just slept there the whole night and then left in the morning. It was pretty funny. So this is the whole trip, leaving from Europe and then around back to the Caribbean and then another half time to New Zealand, which is where I'm still living on my boat. After the trip, I put all my diaries together into a book. Also, once I arrived in New Zealand, I met a really nice guy, and we've been married for 2 years now. So just after we met, we bought a car, traveled around the whole of New Zealand just by car. Then went to America, did the same thing there, bought a car, traveled around America. So we've seen everything from deserts to just cities overflowing due to crazy hailstorms. But in the end, even though we've done a lot of on-land travels as well, my heart still absolutely lies with sailing and with the ocean. And I couldn't imagine living on land at all. So At the moment, actually, we're trying to sell Guppy. We're still living on my boat, but she's getting sold, and we want to buy a bigger boat and maybe set up a youth program with it and also do some sail training on it. So that's kind of the next goal that I'm working on now. So thank you very much for listening.
Wow. Laura Dekker. Fabulous.
Thank you.
Look here. We've got time for a couple of questions. Oh, that was quick. Could I have the magic? Whoa, haven't told you what the prize is yet. Okay, question time.
Is it working?
It's working today.
Well, it has been a lot of years you are sailing. Have you ever been in a situation where you were thinking to yourself, man, if I am going to survive it, Bath will be the largest water body I'm getting in?
No, not really. There have been situations where afterwards I thought, whoa, that was pretty crazy. But at the moment itself, I really tried to train myself to not get scared, especially if you're on your own and you freak out. That's kind of the end. That's when you start making crazy decisions and things go wrong. So I really always focused on just not being scared, not thinking about, oh, what if, and then the world ends kind of thing. Just focused on what needed to happen. And there were moments where I just simply wasn't capable of doing that, and I would just distract myself by reading a book or watching something. And then when I felt like I was capable again to take up the task of thinking what really needed to happen now, then I would continue doing that.
Thank you for the question. Another question, a little bit further back. I need to practice my training. Who would like to question over here? One over this side, can do. Oh!
I have one question. You understand me? Good. Let's say maybe one day you have kids and they become older and older, and once they are 14, and maybe they know what you've done, and they would ask you if they can travel around the world. What would you say?
Yeah, it's a good question. I hate that question, actually. But it's a good question, and I don't have a very good answer to it, but I really admire my parents for letting me go, and especially the way they let me grow up, learning a lot and just making failures, falling on my nose. Yes, I admire them very much for that, and I can only hope that I can do the same thing, that I can, from young on, just let them go and let them learn, and of course they have to make mistakes, so I just hope I can do the same thing.
Great question. The last question, the third question, the person will get a copy of the book signed on stage by Laura. I want a question over here. No, you're too close. Go to the back of the room and ask. No, okay.
Hello, Laura. Really inspiring. Thank you for that. Do you still have the cat, and what's the name?
Sorry?
Do you still have the cat, and what's the name?
No, the cat's name was Kiwi, but she had a lot of waterborne diseases. So on the boat, she was fine, again, because there's no viruses on the boat. But as soon as she came on land, she just started to go downhill really fast. That was really sad.
Eero, come up here, please. Let's admire Eero. He's the only guy who puts his name on his T-shirt. Make it easy for me. Eero, Laura, Eero.
Hello.
Laura is going to now take my personal pen, which is not in my pocket. She's going to sign in a moment with a pen that she finds elsewhere, to Eero with love. Ladies and gentlemen, please, one more time, let's hear a wonderful appreciation. And here's the pen for Laura's signing of the book to Eero. Where's our photographer? Laura's got quite a long name, as you'll notice.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eero.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. Thank you, Laura.